10 cold case murders solved with DNA after years. We live in an incredible age of technology, cars, computers, and even robots. For law enforcement everywhere, one of the biggest of these technologies will likely be the myriad uses of DNA profiling and, more recently, forensic genealogy. Solving crimes is much easier now if you have DNA. Unfortunately for criminals and murderers, this means they are much easier to catch, especially for those who have committed crimes without DNA testing. Thanks to these advances, police were able to close many cold case murders thanks to criminals who left some DNA before they knew they could be caught. 10. Shannon, Lloyd and Renee Cuevas. In May 1987, 23-year-old Shannon Lloyd of Orange County, California was murdered in her apartment. She was sexually assaulted and strangled to death, according to Garden Grove Deputy Chief of Police, Amir Al-Farah. 2 years later, in 1989, a California woman named Renee Cuevas was also found murdered. These two cases were investigated separately until 2003, when the National DNA Database CODIS revealed that samples from both crimes matched the same man. Unfortunately, there was no match with a suspect at the time. Then, in 2021, police turned to the relatively new field of genetic genealogy. Genetic genealogy uses an unknown DNA sample and compares it to DNA databases to look for incomplete partial matches. The technique is used to construct a pedigree based on genetic similarities in hopes of returning the unknown specimen to its owner. In this case, the tracks turned to Reuben Smith. Police determined that Reuben Smith was indeed living in the area at the time and was actually arrested in 1998 for sexual assault and attempted murder in Las Vegas but was never convicted. Eventually used to link him to the Lloyd and Cuevas murders. Reuben Smith died by suicide in 1999. 9. Lloyd Bogle and Patricia Kalitzky. A gruesome double murder opened 1956 in Great Falls, Montana. As reported later by the Great Falls Tribune, 18-year-old Lloyd Bogle was found shot in the head with his arms tied behind his back by his own belt. The next day, his 16-year-old girlfriend, Patricia Kalitzky, was found in another part of town, again killed by a bullet to the head, but added to this was the fear of sexual assault. The case eventually went cold as police determined the murders were linked and followed many leads. Until 2019, Detective Sergeant John Cadner sent DNA samples from Kalitzky's sexual assault to forensic genealogists at Bogle Technology. The scientists were able to use the unknown DNA to find possible matches in public databases and create a reverse pedigree. This method eventually led to a man named Kenneth Gould, who sadly passed away in 2007. However, using DNA from Gould's surviving relatives, the police were able to definitively establish that he was responsible for the double murder and sexual assault of Lloyd and Kalitzky. To date, this cold case is one of the oldest to have been recently resolved with DNA evidence. 8. George and Catherine Peacock. George and Catherine Peacock, a Danby, Vermont couple, were murdered in September 1989. The couple, aged 76 and 73, were stabbed to death in their home, which showed no sign of forced entry. A man named Peacock's son-in-law, Michael Louise, was identified as a suspect a few weeks later. Unfortunately, all the evidence against him was circumstantial and the case went cold as there wasn't enough to link Louise to the murder. Concrete forensic evidence finally arrived in May 2020. In October 1989, a DNA test was performed on a blood sample found in Louise's car. While the first tests on blood were inconclusive, advances in DNA testing enabled the conclusive determination of the blood as belonging to George Peacock. Louise was finally arrested for double murder in 2022. 7. Janet Love. In April 1986, 32-year-old Janet Love was found raped and killed with a bullet to the head in her Bedford, Texas apartment. In the 36 years that have passed, the incident has been referred to many detectives, but no result has been obtained. The case has cooled. But in 2020, Bedford Police Sergeant Brett Bowen submitted DNA related to Love's sexual assault for advanced DNA testing and forensic genealogy. The DNA was eventually matched to Ray Chapa, Love's 19-year-old neighbor at the time of the murder. Although Chapa died in 2021, just 9 months before he was identified, police and the FBI are still investigating the possibility that Chapa was linked to other crimes in other states. 6. Robert Reed. Elkhart County, Indiana is where Robert Reed was found robbed and murdered at his home in May 2002. Blood pooled around his misshapen head, and his neck and head were injured multiple times. Despite the abundant blood at the scene, none of the DNA is conclusively linked to anyone but the victim. Case, Sergeant in 2021. Greg Harder of the Elkhart County Police noticed a possible overlooked piece of DNA evidence. The blood stain on the victim's shirt suggests that the accused was standing on the corpse while searching the victim's pockets, and blood was spilled on the shirt. The results matched a man named Marcus Love. After further testing, Love's blood was found to be mixed with other blood samples taken from Reed's murder scene. It is unclear how Love actually came into contact with Reed. Regardless, Love was arrested for the murder of Robert Reed in 2022, according to DNA evidence. 5. Jessica Baggen. Jessica Baggen, 17, from Sitka, Alaska, disappeared in early May 1996. 2 days later, she was found sexually assaulted and strangled. A man soon confessed to his guilt. However, due to lack of physical evidence, this unidentified man was acquitted of the crime. After that, the case went cold. In February 2019, DNA from Baggen's clothing and body was submitted to a public genealogy database after previous DNA matching attempts had failed. A person named Steve Branch was identified as the contact person. Branch died by suicide in early August 2020 after being questioned by soldiers at his home in Arkansas. After the autopsy, Branch's DNA was ordered. The DNA from Branch's remains was confirmed to match the DNA from Baggen's body. 4. Maurice Chivarella. 9-year-old Maurice Chivarella was walking to school in March 1964 when she was abducted. In Hazleton, Pennsylvania, the girl was found, raped, and strangled that same afternoon. Over the years, more than 230 members of the Pennsylvania State Police have worked on the case to no avail. The case was revived in 2020 with the help of new DNA technology and genetic genealogy expert Eric Schubert. The extensive family tree that Schubert put together led investigators to James Forte, a violent sexual assault record. Since Forte has been dead since 1980, DNA was taken from his exhumed body. Forte's DNA matched the genetic material found in the victim's jacket. 3. Joette Smith. In late March 1983, Joette Smith's body was found swimming in the San Lorenzo River. The subsequent investigation led Santa Cruz County Police to a man named Eric Drummond, who had previously asked Smith out and was reportedly turned down. Smith was identified as a suspect 5 years after he was found, but was never arrested as there was no physical evidence to link him to the murder. Physical evidence managed to close the deal in 2022. DNA was found on Smith's clothes at the time of his murder, but new advances in technology have only recently allowed the sample to be tested and matched. DNA profile matched Eric Drummond. Drummond died by suicide before being arrested. 2. Nadine Nager. Nadine Nager was a woman found murdered in January 1980 from Willoughby, Ohio. She was stabbed more than 40 times in the room with her 25-year-old young son. Blood believed to be that of the killer was found on the victim's clothing, but could not be identified. That is, until 2022, when the police identify a suspect. With further testing and genealogy research, it was determined that the blood on Nager's suit matched the DNA of someone named Stephen Simcak. Sadly, Simcak will never be prosecuted for Nager's death as he died in 2018. 1. Lindy Beachler. In December 1975, 19-year-old Lindy Beachler was murdered in her Lancaster, Pennsylvania apartment. He was stabbed 19 times, and prosecutors said evidence at the crime scene shows sexual motivation. Unfortunately, important clues were not obtained in the case and the Beachler murder fell into silence. In 2019, Beachler's case was revived when prosecutors released composite pictures of a man whose DNA was presumed to have been left at the crime scene. DNA pedigree was used to compare the sample with public databases to find familial matches. These familial pairings led the police to David C. Napoli, who was one of Beachler's neighbors at the time. A direct sample was taken of Sinopoli's DNA and matched to the sample found at the murder scene. She was arrested in July 2022. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel.